June 27, 2012. Thank you to everybody who's here bright and early. And I'm just one council member right now, Councilmember Eric Garcetti. I chair the committee, and council members Bernard Parks and Tom Lavange are members who we hope to see. We do have 3 items, but first, do we have any general public comment? Okay, we'll go ahead and close our general public comment. And if we can take up our first item, please.
Item number 1 is a motion Garcetti-Krikorian relative to the status of all fees charged for film and television productions and the impact of waiving all city fees for television pilots filmed substantially in the city.
All right, I think I want to start with diagnosing this problem. Before we get into this was a motion to look at whether we might be able to explore something to incentivize pilots to film here by waiving their fees if they're substantially filmed in the city, and we have to obviously define what substantially filmed means. But if I could ask Film LA to come forward first, actually, I'd like to kind of get the diagnosis. You can come all the way to the table here. Diagnose a little bit in terms of what happened with pilot productions this year. I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of folks in the industry. New York had, I think, quite a successful year in stealing a lot of pilots away from the city of Los Angeles. While those don't guarantee that the shows, if they're picked up, stay in that city, why don't you give us a little bit of a trend report and diagnosis? Good morning, Paul.
Good morning. Paul Audley, President of Film LA. What we saw this year is a continuing trend related to pilots because the California Film Incentive does not apply to them, where they are filming more and more frequently out of state. We also see a trend for the more expensive types of production, in particular television dramas, of leaving the state of California as well. And so we've seen sort of a double trending that as the pilots leave, so do their key productions. Some of them have returned, but they tend to be the half-hour single-camera variety or the in-studio variety of those productions. And we don't see a reversal of that trend without some level of assistance for those productions, in particular pilots, to stay and hopefully continue working here. As an example, several of the studios that we surveyed, we've seen since the late 90s, the quality and economic value of productions is dropping, so that what used to be sound stages full of feature films transitioned over to sound stages full of television dramas, and now have transitioned over to half-hour sitcoms or children's programming and reality TV. So we're losing the key economic business, and pilots is a good indicator of what's happening to us there.
In the pilot production report that you have here, and which we'll make sure is part of this council file, if it isn't already, we'll include that online so we can attach that to the council file. Anecdotally, some people said that this year, at least for some of the stations, for I think it was ABC maybe, that didn't have a single 1-hour drama that had a pilot here. They were all in New York, or
Correct.
Most of them in New York. These 11-12 numbers, does that include this season?
It does.
Okay, so just going to that first overview page, if we looked at the previous year, we have on half-hour, which is presumably sitcom.
Most
Network, actually, we saw an increase of 9, a decrease in cable of 3, and then on the dramas, it was roughly the same numbers as the previous year. At the same time, you see, in certain other locations, a decrease. Is this in your mind, or is this not a trend? I mean, you said it is, but looking at some of these numbers, it's difficult to see. Is it that some of these are lower level productions? Are we losing the marquee pilots?
We're losing the marquee. What we're seeing is that typically the studios prefer to keep their sitcoms close by. They don't have as big budgets, and so they're more likely to stay here. They also do rapid change in script and other things that make the studios want them to be close in. We've maintained pretty well on those numbers, but we continue to lose the true large budget things like television dramas to other states that offer broader incentives. And I think that's what you see in some of the information about drama pilots as well.
The incentives that are being used in other states as we look at New York, as we look at Louisiana and other places, New Mexico, do all of their tax credits apply to television as well as film?
All of the ones you mentioned do. Every tax credit in every state is different in what it allows you to expend or how you can use the credits, but all of those states do apply to television.
All right, let me see if we... And I guess it's on the third page where you have drama's dramatic flight, which is I know a difficult grammatical sentence to say, but you had, I think, the apostrophe in the right place. In fall 2010, you show that 58% were filmed in Los Angeles. By fall of this year, I guess this is anticipating it'll be about 44%. So a pretty big drop-off there.
Yeah. Councilmember, I think that the trend that we see and that we are nervous about continuing is that as these productions continue to find new homes, and New York is building an additional 13 sound stages to provide them homes, California's lack of competition at the state level for this work is going to continue to see us degrading the quality for economic reasons of the programming that is being filmed here in LA. And it's very important that the state get into the game fully in order to prevent the continued loss of these major economic engines.
Now, if we were to waive fees for filming in Los Angeles, this would mostly apply, obviously, to dramas because there isn't much in terms of permitting that a sitcom requires. Is that correct?
It depends. Some of the single cameras actually do some location work, and now they are making up the majority of our television work by default. But many of them are studio-bound.
So do you have any idea what level of fees the city receives from a typical pilot?
Well, pilots differ also in the scope and scale of what they do. I've asked for those numbers this morning because I didn't realize that no one else had gathered those for you. And so I was just actually checking to see if I'd gotten a response, but I haven't seen them yet.
Okay, no worries. That's going to obviously be an important part of our assessment. Today is to kind of start the conversation and then to have the CAO work with you closely to see if we can quantify what that is.
Actually, here it is.
All right.
The wonder of technology.
Good stuff. Fresh off the
Between
BlackBerry.
7/1/11 to 6/30/2012, it was about $360,000 in city fees.
360,000?
$360,000 for TV pilots.
For a single one or for all of them?
For all the pilots.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, that certainly seems like something, even in tough economic times, we might be able to absorb. What's your, let me just ask you kind of your personal opinion. Is your sense that something like this would help? You know, I was talking to a big producer last night, who said, you know, our experience is that in a lot of these places, there's the shiny light of tax incentives. And when you actually go and do forensic accounting, many of these pilots and many actually shows never actually take advantage of the tax credits years later. That there is a psychological effect that is as powerful as anything else. And part of what we want to do here in Los Angeles is obviously continue to have sound fiscal footing for our city's budget. But I'm very determined to rebrand this city as film-friendly as much as we can. And so things like this, my instinct says would do that. But what is your opinion of whether, you know, something like this, it's easily digestible by somebody in the industry? Hey, pilots are free to film here. If we're able to do that, it doesn't seem like a large amount of money. I mean, there's probably discretionary money of this much by passing the hat around 15 council members any given year. Would it have a psychological effect, or you think it would really do nothing? Where do you land on this?
I believe that everything the city is doing and has done so far has made an impact on the industry's ability to film here. I think that for pilots, this is a good factor. Pilots going to other states for the film credits, they're correct. They don't always get to collect them at the back end. And truthfully, the sort of division and decision making between the finance arms of the film companies and the production arms is sometimes bizarre. To film in New York is extraordinarily expensive. And many of them have told me that by the time they finish, the tax credit makes them break even with California, and they wish they'd never gone. So even a little trigger would be helpful, and I think that that's the message we're also trying to give to Sacramento, is that they can really counter this with everything they do to tell the industry that they really want it here. Those messages are important.
So besides our campaign to keep filming here in Los Angeles, we need to have a secondary campaign in New York to say how expensive it is to film there.
Yes.
Or here to remind people how expensive it is. It's an excellent point and something that we should speak out about as often as possible. So you think your gut on net is that this would be a positive, at least psychological incentive for people to stay here and to feel like the city is a film-friendly location?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. If I can ask the CAO to come forward on this. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Wonderful. Eva Bitar from the CAO.
Thank you. I think as taking the next step on this, what I'd like to direct is that if you can work together with Film LA and to evaluate those fees on pilots that are filmed here and maybe even have them break down by department. This is a complicated thing because we obviously have fees across different departments, but I really want us to take this at a high level and bring this different departments together. I think at this level, this is for many departments, as is said around here, budget dust. So it's achievable. It would be one thing if it was a $5 million hit to the budget. $360,000 may pay for itself in a single pilot. And trying to get an assessment of how much a difference this might make to a production, I know is going to be quite difficult, but maybe you can also work with Film LA and just get some anecdotal evidence as well for that report of talking to some people who make these decisions about, we don't have to even quantify how much it is to them. Just say, hey, if it was free to film pilots here in Los Angeles, it includes a little bit of that. I know it's tough to do because we often ask just for quantitative, hard data, but I'd like to get a sense of in the industry whether this would make a difference. And a couple of other questions I have. Are all city properties available and advertised to location managers for filming?
Yes, most of them are on the Film LA site. There's been a lot of properties because because they're part of the CRA that are up in flux that the industry used to enjoy utilizing. So right now we don't really have a say-so in what's
an example of a CRA property that has been used? I can think of housing that CRA does. Is that... Sorry? I'm sorry. I can't... Why don't you come back, Paul? Sorry. Can't quite hear you.
The areas that we think are most beneficial now from CRA would include empty parking lots around key filming locations. Housing tends not to be available.
So these were CRA-owned lots, like
yes.
like an ArcLight or something like
right.
that? Gotcha, okay. We should, in our city's conversations with the artists formerly known as CRA, that whatever the successor agency is called today, make sure that that's part of our conversations with them as well about in this bridge period. I know under the state law, some of those are supposed to be sold off, and it's a rather confusing space right now what will happen to those, but I'd like to at least get a sense of that. Let's see if there's anything else. And the fees that we currently charge, do they cover costs for our departments?
Not currently, no. We
already subsidize to some extent? Mm-hmm. And that's
about $1 million loss in fire, and we have almost the equivalent in Rec and Parks because they haven't raised their fees in 17 years.
Got you. So it's about a $2 million deficit between the two? Okay. And, okay, if we can, let me see if there's anything else. Why don't we try to assess then if that number is correct in this interim period report back, see if this provides any incentive, if we can attach this report to the file as well from Film LA, and we'll see if we can get this moving. Okay. Thank you. And this will just be a recommendation, communication from the chair since we do not have a quorum still. I will forward that. Thank you. Appreciate it. Item number 2, please.
Item number 2 is a motion Garcetti-Krikorian relative to the evaluation of the city's taxing system for radio and television broadcasting industries and the different taxing methods, including a maximum tax similar to the entertainment production cap.
All right. We have 2 public speaker cards on this. And I'd like to ask Eric and Sarah to come forward. Eric, representing the MPA and from the MPA.
Want us to come up?
Yeah, sure. We can come up with that. Yeah, we don't need to set the timer. So just let us know the info you'd like to tell us. Good morning. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Garcetti. As you said, my name is Sarah Walsh. I'm here with the Motion Picture Association of America. And I just wanted to thank you for introducing this motion and for the committee's consideration. We hope it's a first step in obtaining some clarity, consistency, and equity in the methodology that's used to apportion the gross receipts for the broadcast industry. And I'm joined by MPA's outside counsel on tax issues, Eric Methke, and he can describe a little bit more of the problem and answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Methke.
Good morning, Chairman Garcetti. I do have a brief statement if I can read it.
Sure, yeah. Go
Great.
ahead.
Again, I am Eric Methke. I'm a partner in the firm of Nielsen, Merksmer, Paranello, Gross, and Leone, representing the Motion Picture Association, supporting your motion affecting the application of the business license tax to radio and television broadcasters. We did set forth our concerns in detail in a white paper. We have copies of that, and we can make that available to the committee. Good to see you have it. I won't go through that line by line, but I will try to hit the major points of that, and then, of course, I'm available to answer any questions you may have. Broadcaster revenue is inherently multi-jurisdictional. It's earned both inside and outside the city. Some stations have property inside and outside the city. They may have their studio in the city and a transmitter outside the city. Some gather news inside and outside the city. They all sell advertising inside and outside the city. And of course, their audiences, on which their advertising revenue is based, stretch well beyond the city limits throughout the county and throughout most of Southern California and even into some adjoining states. The current municipal code recognizes this, but while the existing code says that the gross receipts of broadcasters shall be apportioned so that it fairly calculates the amount of their gross receipts attributable to their activities within the city, the process is just not working very well. It's flawed and it's badly in need of some revisions. For instance, in some cases, the Office of Finance has just flatly denied apportionment entirely, and it's forced some of the broadcasters to bring costly appeals. Where, in other cases where they do allow apportionment, the Office of Finance uses varying methods of apportionment that give the industry some pause to wonder whether that method chosen is linked to what generates the maximum amount of apportionable income within the city. For instance, if you have primarily a physical presence inside the city, it's very popular to use expenses as a way to apportion. On the other hand, if you're primarily outside the city, we have reports where the city has used more of an audience approach to try and pull receipts into the city limits. Neither method really reflects how the gross receipts of a typical broadcaster are earned. And if you think about it too, use of an expense methodology, it's really amounting to a tax on economic development, because the more that any taxpayer, including a broadcaster, the more they invest in their property or the more jobs they add, the more expense they incur within the city, and therefore their apportionment will go up even if they earn not one single more dollar of income. So in some senses, the apportionment methodology that's used primarily by the city is actually a discouragement to adding jobs and property here. That doesn't help the broadcasters, and that certainly doesn't help the city either. There's another issue involving agency fees that are paid out by the broadcasters to advertising agencies involved in the placement of advertising. These fees are paid out pursuant to an agreement between the ad agencies and their clients, not between the broadcasters and the ad agencies. Yet we've had intermittent reports of auditors who want to roll those agency receipts that we're paying out back into the gross receipts of the broadcaster and taxing them. It's been, again, an intermittent policy, not much clarity. In our paper, we've provided some initial suggestions for reform. We've proposed one methodology that's a blend of expense and sales experience, and we think it's a better reflection of how receipts are derived. We have also proposed an overall cap, similar to the cap in current law for the motion picture industry. And we also have proposed in the white paper to clarify that agency fees and so-called national ad revenue are excluded from the gross receipts of the broadcaster. The Motion Picture Association believes that all tax systems should have a few basic characteristics. They should be clear, they should be stable, they should encourage economic development rather than suppress it, and it should be applied uniformly to similarly situated taxpayers. We don't think the current system makes any of those objectives. And we look forward to working with you and city staff to explore some of these suggestions as well as other options, and we'd very much like to be a working partner with the CLO, the CLA, the Office of Finance, and others to better define the problem and to try to develop some solutions that work for all. And thank you for allowing me the opportunity to come today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
The three options that you put forward for reform here, could you just detail a little bit more about each one of these, the hybrid expense sales approach, the
Sure.
cap on gross receipts, and the second is close to what we've done with the motion picture industry, or to amend the code to clarify agency fees and revenue are excluded. But could you walk us through those?
Sure.
What you think the impact would be?
I'm happy to do that. Maybe the easiest thing to do is to go from backwards to
Sure.
forwards.
Okay.
Again, while we believe that it should be clear that agency fees, as I've described, should not be included in the gross receipts of a broadcaster, the code is silent on it. And there's really nothing that says that classifies their status as in or out. Same with so-called national ad revenue. This is revenue that comes from advertising that's actually sold on a national basis in New York or some other city as part of a national ad campaign that may involve revenue back to the local station. It's revenue that's not generated within the city, and in fairness to the Office of Finance, they have not included that previously, yet there is no clear pronouncement. They've been doing that just sort of as administrative practice, not with any sort of clear code.
So this would be to protect that from ever happening, not that it is currently being.
Correct.
Okay.
That is more protecting the status quo.
Agency fees as well?
Agency fees as well. Although there we have had some, there the practice has been intermittent. We've actually had some auditors that want to include it and some that have excluded it. It seems to be, again, there's no clear, there's been no clear, ultimately no clear policy. Although I would say if you had to say which one predominates, it's probably the exclusion of agency fees, but it's been intermittent. With regard to a cap, we propose the same cap that applies to the motion picture industry of $9,245. It is very, very difficult in a multi-jurisdictional business where you have players who are primarily inside the city and outside the city to come up with a system that really does treat everyone fairly and at the same time doesn't create a huge tax burden for anybody, that it becomes a real incentive to move outside of the city limits. I think it's our position that the MPAA's position that the cap that currently is in place for the motion picture industry addresses a number of those concerns, and that a similar cap in place for the broadcast industry would be tremendously helpful. Mm-hmm. But then the question is how do you apportion receipts up to that cap? And that really comes to the third element of this, at least as a starting point. Our view of it is that what really generates the revenue for a radio or television station is the actions of its sales force. They are selling advertising time throughout the area, and generally the industry practice is to go negotiate and sign the agreements at the place of business of the client. Those clients, of course, are scattered within and without the city, and so it's our view is that the one way that you could have a hybrid of sort of sales and expense would be to track where, in fact, those contracts are consummated. And that would be, and then look to the expense associated with that of wages and commissions, and then use that as the basis for that expense as a basis for apportioning the gross receipts.
So why would we do that? Let's say Coca-Cola, based out of Atlanta, wants to advertise to LA City residents, and you sign that contract in Atlanta. Is that not being spent here locally?
That would probably be national ad revenue. Big people like Coca-Cola don't negotiate with individual stations. My understanding is the practice is that would be part of the national ad revenue that is already excluded.
All right, we'll take Coca-Cola. Let's say there's a new company in Nevada, and Los Angeles City happens to be a good market for it, and they are advertising in 5 local markets, including ours, from Las Vegas to San Diego to. Wouldn't that exclude them from, if we consummated that contract at their headquarters in Las Vegas?
It would.
Okay.
It would, yes. But by the same token, if you had a number of advertisers wholly located here, but with interests throughout the basin, that would be the counterbalance to that.
Mm-hmm.
This is
so
why
we would capture them even though they're advertising to multiple places?
Correct.
Okay.
So there's a rough balance to it. And again, Mr. Chairman, this is a suggestion to open the discussion. We're certainly happy to sit down and discuss any one of a number of other options as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Why don't you guys sit tight? You can, if you want, you can sit on the first row over there. I'd like to ask the Office of Finance to come forward. Yep. Don't dread it. It's okay. It's all good. And maybe we'll have the CAO join you as well. That way you're not as lonely at the table. Bring in some backup. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Robert Lee, Office of Finance.
Hi, Robert.
Hi.
So, a couple questions. One, I want to give you the chance to kind of respond to some of what was said as well. For instance, on agency fees, that there's been inconsistency, and usually it's not, but sometimes it is included. Why don't you walk us through kind of how the Office of Finance does look at broadcast industry gross receipts, and if there are any existing kind of internal policies to help guide the assessing some of those pieces that were brought up by the MPAA representatives?
Yes. In general, if you notice on our website, we have the Auditor's Training Manual. Mm-hmm. The information goes into specifics on the LO 45, which is this section of it. It goes into breakdown as it was stated previously, that at a national level, it is exempt. And until our auditor gets in there and observes or reviews the books, the logs, the records, there's no specific way to delineate until they see it. But in general, there are protocols as to how it is handled within the department, whether administratively or documented procedurally.
So when the agency fees, which is a little different than the national advertising revenues, if this is advertising time sold by the broadcasting industry and the buy that's placed by the advertising agency, the fee that is charged for that labor it performs, is there any consistent guide to taxing that?
I would have to refer back to some of our auditors for the specifics of it. Okay. And we have spoken to CAO's office. We've given them information as to procedure, what we have, the specifics of each ordinance, and also general statistics for their reference. Okay. And we will continue to work with them on that. But until we see what is provided by their white paper, it would be probably best to see what we have.
When I authored the earlier law that established the entertainment cap, did we ever quantify how much that, at least in immediate fiscal terms, cost the general fund impact was? I mean, I think long term it comes back to, but obviously there's a short term cost. Do we know what that was?
At this point, I don't have that information. Okay. We could look forward on that.
Let's if we can, I can ask you to report back on 3 things. One, the one we just discussed on the consistency on the agency fees. 2, looking at what the impact was for the minimum tax for the entertainment cap that we established to the general fund in the short term. And then 3, if we were to extend this to broadcasting as well, how much we anticipate that impact would be to the general fund. And if you can report on those. Do you want to join us as well? Or are you good? Good morning.
Good morning. Ed Cabrera, Assistant Director, Office of Finance. I heard the question as far as what the policy is, and just as a point of clarification, the radio and television broadcasting classification exempts activity that occurs outside the state of California. So, for example, the national advertising revenue would be exempt. What we would be taxing would be local advertising revenue, as well as any activity which occurs within the state of California. If it occurs outside the city of Los Angeles, then we would apportion those gross receipts. There was a statement that was referenced as far as taxation or apportionment using the location of viewers. That is not a method that we use. It does not take into account what the actual taxpayer does. So that is not a apportionment method that the Office of Finance uses when we are taxing that particular industry.
Is there any, if you say that right now, and it was reflected also in the earlier testimony that the national advertising revenue are excluded, is that in the code or is that just an internal policy? And is there any downside to specifying that more explicitly in the code?
That particular language is not there. There is a specific language that indicates that only activity within the state of California is subject to taxation. So by extension, that excludes national advertising revenue.
Okay.
So, for example, a broadcast, let's say you have, a particular channel. If you had advertising on, let's say Fox, for example, where there's a national broadcast, advertising revenue derived from that broadcast would not be subject to taxation. If you have a local news channel, that advertising revenue would be subject to taxation. So the local activity is subject to taxation. And again, that's limited to activity which the taxpayers engaged in within the state of California and, of course, within the city of Los Angeles.
I understand that. It's more question, do you think it's explicit right now, or is there any downside in making that more explicit?
I think it is explicit right now, and it is also explicit within staff, that specific language with regards to national advertising revenue, that's within our training manual, and that's available on the finance website.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and ask for a report back. Let's see if the CEO can work with the Office of Finance maybe to get those numbers of what we think the establishing a minimum tax amount similar to the entertainment cap would be. I'd like to see that language in the report too, so we can make that clear and make sure that the industry is comfortable that that's there and it will stay in there. And also any detail that you can add on the agency fees piece as well, and maybe you guys can work together and point out if you've had folks in the industry who've said sometimes it's been there's been disposition where it was included even though you did say most of the time it's not. We can help point out those cases, and I'd like to hear what our policy was in those circumstances. And I guess also I would just ask the CAO to look at the white paper with the Office of Finance, and the only one that's not covered in that direction is number 1 on the options for reform, and just give me your feedback on that suggestion, or any other ways of addressing this issue as well. I think I've talked to a number of people, and I think it's been quite successful for filming to have this at the entertainment production level, and on the broadcasting side, which we've seen some things leave the city as well. I'd like to try to quantify what impact it would be and whether we could do something similar here. Okay.
If I may, just a couple of comments.
Sure.
With regards to agency fees, generally speaking, and this goes across the board, regardless of the business type, if there are gross receipts or any type of revenue that is received by a business that's acting as an agent on behalf of another entity, then generally those gross receipts are not subject to taxation. Of course, the issue whether someone's acting as an agent or not is a factual basis, given the particular facts of that situation. Certainly, the Office of Finance is prepared to support both the CAO and CLA's analysis, and we can provide information with regards to business tax. We certainly would defer to the CAO's Office of Economic Analysis for impacts with regards
Sure.
to other economic factors.
Yeah, and I'm not going to ask for that right now. I mean, I just think we have obviously economic analysis is a little overtaxed, no pun intended, as it is. So we'll work on the basis of what we did with the entertainment one as well. We'll just get those hard numbers from you. So I'll go ahead and adopt the motion and move that forward. Okay. So hold on a second. And I think we'll move the motion through council, and then we'll have those reports come back to committee. Okay? All right. Thank you very much. Let's take up item number 3.
Item number 3 is a Los Angeles Police Department and Film LA to report relative to staffing requirements for film permitting services, field responses to film-related issues, and information materials on disruptions to permitted film productions.
I see some of our LA's finest coming forward. Not that you're not too, Paul. I just want to make sure. Just, you don't have as much bling on as they do.
I'll show you a picture later.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning again. Who wants to start out? Captain Yona or Paul?
Well,
Okay.
I can start out on the first part of it by saying that the resources committed by LAPD have made a tremendous difference in the ability of film companies to work in the city of Los Angeles. The resources and the expertise of these officers on the street in both helping us with unpermitted filming, which creates huge problems for us in neighborhoods where they're irresponsible and feel no responsibility to the community, has been dramatic. And our ability to deal with problems where someone wants to interrupt filming, and now having the word out that these officers are present and available, and the council's change in the code to allow them to actually do something about it, have made a dramatic difference. And we hear from the film industry that this has made LA so much more film friendly and more desirable to be present in. So their participation, their commitment of resources and time has made a dramatic difference in filming in Los Angeles. Now, as for the resources and how it works in the department, I'll let the captain talk.
Hand that over. Good morning, Captain.
Captain Phil Fontanetta, Emergency Operations Division.
Yeah.
I have Lieutenant Loomis and Sergeant Turvey, the direct supervisors for the police officers assigned to the film unit. We are at complete, table organization is complete for the resources allocated. For year to date, for calls for service, we're up 11% response, and for film locations inspected, we're up 13%. So those are pretty proud numbers, and we take into account the fact that we're doing more than just calls for service and film location inspections. We're also inspecting and auditing the film permits as they come in. And I'd like Sergeant Turvey to briefly explain what that encompasses.
Okay. Good morning, Sergeant.
Good morning, Sergeant Lisa Turvey, Emergency Operations Division. We have a couple officers that are assigned in the unit that are specifically designated to review and approve or kick back film permits that come in on a daily basis. Our numbers for the approvals this year to date, is up 7%. These officers review each permit and each location. On average, a film permit would encompass approximately 3 different locations or more. So the officers are continually reviewing each location for approval, as well as the permit itself. So this results in tens of thousands of locations per year that we're looking at and reviewing. Most of the time they're approved. There's occasional times where we kick a permit back for missing information or base camp information or other obstacles, but we're very proud to be able to look and review at each permit and do the proper oversight. And it's been a success too.
In terms of the increase percentage-wise from 11%, how many overall is that in terms of actual raw numbers?
Looking at 264, and that was from 223 last year.
And part of what we looked at is options is kind of training for, force multiplier for you all, so you don't have to have as many people just specialized in this, but that senior lead officers or others in some of the divisions would get ongoing training in this area to help supplement, especially if you don't have officers on at any given time. How has that progressed?
We have an ongoing effort to meet with senior leads in the geographic areas, as well as attend supervisor meetings, to disseminate some training and information concerning the enforcement of film issues specifically. The Ordinance 4120, which allows us to enforce interference issues and activities outside permit conditions, is somewhat specialized. It's a misdemeanor section, but typically the areas and the area personnel just need a little information, which we're able to provide so that they're able to get out and enforce these issues when they need to. So we do have an ongoing process every year to keep that training up.
So are all SLOs trained in this, or is it just a percentage?
We attend senior lead school, so all the new senior leads going through that school are educated on these issues, as well as ongoing existing senior leads in the different areas. We try and get at least once a year to get into each area.
And do we track kind of in hot spots where we know that there's merchants or residents who have kind of tried to basically extort different production stuff? Do we track who those are, keep a database of them or anything like that?
We do track a few locations that we call flagged locations that are typically where common problems occur with businesses or residents trying to extort or interfere with productions. There's a lot of neighborhoods that get a lot of filming, and people will sometimes go out of their way to make a buck.
Right.
But we've been very successful. One of our biggest accomplishments for this year, in my opinion, is back in March we were able to address an issue downtown with the gated alleys. We were in a position to address and clarify the access issues to those alleys and prevent productions from being charged for access in those alleys.
Because there's still public alleyways, it's just we have sometimes local control of a merchant or something with a key.
Yes, they are, but
that
for
doesn't
years,
give them the ability.
those gatekeepers have been making a lot of money on that access, and we were able to clarify the whole thing, do some research, get building and safety involved, and get some clarification on all that access, and it was a big success for us.
Great, congratulations on that. That's great. Okay. Anything else that we should be doing? Part of it was obviously when we talked about this before, having the resources that you need. In an ideal world, what could you do with more resources, and what, in terms of the mission, do you feel that you're unable to accomplish right now, if anything?
Well, recently we've obtained. We currently have a staff of 6 officers, 3 dedicated teams, which previous to a few months ago, we were only able to run units on a daily basis during business hours. Now we're able to run evening shifts and weekends coverage. So just the influx of new personnel that we've received this year has made a tremendous difference, and we couldn't be happier.
Good. Well, we intend for this committee to stick up for you guys and be a voice to advocate. So use us accordingly, and you don't have to advocate. We will, up the chain of command. Appreciate that. Anything else to add from the table?
Just on the second item about some kind of publicity out to the field, we had not received a request to create a publication, but I will share through the clerk what currently exists and which the film community uses to refer people to when there are questions existing in 2 parts of our site, one for communities and one for filmmakers, are references to the ordinances and how they work. If it's the desire of the council, we certainly could create a PDF that film crews could download, but creating printed material just isn't how they're working out there, and it would be easy enough for us to do, but right now they refer to these 2 pieces of our website.
Yeah, I think that would be useful if we could work with Film LA to accomplish that, and that's something that production companies could just either bring up electronically, or print out ahead of time and have to make sure people know.
Sure. Easy enough.
All right. Well, thank you for the report. I appreciate that. And we'll go ahead and start working on that handout. Thank you for the good work, and we'll receive and file, I think, actually, this. Or should we continue and keep it in?
Yeah,
Okay.
there's no physical report submitted for this file.
Okay, so is it best
we'll
to,
just continue.
okay, we'll just note that then and continue it. Thank you. All right, that brings this meeting to a close. I want to thank everybody. 3 good initiatives for our filming industry here, looking at a tax credit to help with our filming of pilots by potentially waiving our fees. Second, continuing to reduce our production cost taxes and expanding that to TV and radio, and making sure that the disruption of filming doesn't occur in an illegal way to continue to make LA a film-friendly place. So thank you all very much, and this meeting is adjourned. 10 minutes to spare. Are they really?
Julie wants to do an interview.
Film-friendly, exactly, for broadcast.
What
are they here for?
You to do an interview on the hate crime. She's coming back down, back there, I think, with Channel 5.